It was April of 1864, and President Lincoln was in the midst of watching the Civil War unfold in front of him, literally at times where he would be able to see exactly what was going on. It was back in the days when presidents actually could walk around the town and be a part of what was going on. There wasn't necessarily an incredible fear of assassination, and yet we know that this president was assassinated. And so we also know some things about Lincoln from his own biography, that he was susceptible to depression. And that depression was difficult on him, especially watching his country. One of the things that was interesting about Lincoln was that he was not a person who saw it as a North and South issue. It was his country that was being torn apart. You see, he may have had a different perspective than what most of the people in the country had, and maybe that's exactly why he was where he was at the time that he was there. And so one evening, he decided, I need to hear a word. And so he told his aide, this evening, we're going to go down to the church, and I want to hear the sermon that the pastor is giving. And so, about dusk, it says in the book, he went down the street with his aide to the National Presbyterian Church, which was the church of the state at that time that he attended. And he slipped in the side door so that he would not necessarily be noticed and interrupt the service, and he sat down, and as he took his stovepipe hat off of his head and put it on his knee, he crossed his legs and put his hat down. And the aide recalls that he did not move the entire sermon. He listened intently. And at the end of the sermon, the aide stepped up to him after everyone else had moved off and gone away. The aide stepped up to him and said, Mr. Lincoln, what did you think of the sermon? And he said, the preacher had a wonderful presence about him. And the words were clear and concise. And his points were well made. And the aide said, so you liked the sermon? And he said to his aide, no, he failed. And the aide said, what? He failed? And he said, he did not challenge us to do something great. I wonder if our church, not necessarily New Wine, but the church as a whole, has a tendency to just allow people to come and sit and leave and never be challenged to do something great. I worry about that for us. I worry about that because oftentimes, and it happened again yesterday, I spoke with someone that I had not seen in about a year and a half. A person that I spent quite a bit of time with when I was on the Wesley Foundation board at OU. And somebody that I talked with almost on a weekly basis. He was the president and I was the finance chair, and so we did a lot of work together. And at the onset of yesterday's conversation, it was, hey, how are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Things good? Yeah, things are good. And we separated, and I went and got my hamburger, and the guys went and got their hamburger and sat down and ate. Then later, as I moved around to another area, there stood David. And David was obviously kind of standing there, letting himself be present. And so I said, really, how are you doing? And he said, well, in April I had a heart attack. And in May, I was let go from my job. And so I've been jobless all summer long, and I'm still trying to find a job. And my mother passed away in the midst of this time, and I said, David, how could I not have known? He said, well, I just didn't tell him. You see, I think sometimes we have an easier time seeing the pride in others than we do in ourselves. And he said, it is my pride that kept me from reaching out. So yesterday again I said, well, because I'm at a loss. I don't know how you would have felt in the midst of that, but I'm at a loss. I'm thinking, what can I do? How can I help? What can make this better? I just want to rub your head, Craig, and say it's all going to be okay. Because that's how we're attuned to being, is, I've got to help, I've got to reach out. But sometimes greatness comes in moments that are least expected. So David began to talk about what his plans were right away. And interestingly enough, I've got some experience in some of the things that he's dealing with. And so we were able to talk, and then I was able to say, don't leave me out of the loop. Don't walk through this alone. You see, that's what we're doing. That's what Andy said this morning, and that's what Brandon said this morning in our time, is, just the fact that I don't feel alone. Just the fact that I'm not out there by myself, facing all of the fears of life. And if you are someone who has the gall to stand here and say that on a weekly basis you don't have a little bit of fear, you're just a liar. We all have fears. Some of us live in fear, and that's not any better than saying we don't have fear. But we are called to be great. And we're not called to be great because you were just a magnificent person like Abraham Lincoln and you got plucked into a moment in time that you are going to be seen as a great person. You're called to be great because God is great. And you're called to be great because you are a part of that fabric that is great. And so this morning, I have to tell you, last week I got done with the sermon and I told Elizabeth I'm a little afraid because I don't know what I'm preaching next week. And so we're kind of doing this backward and forward thing. We spent this time in Joshua and we remember what that was like. And now this week, God just led me to say, where did all that come from? How did we get to where we were when we entered the promised land? And so now we jumped back and we're going to look at this chapter from Exodus, the 3rd chapter, the 1st through the 15th verse. And this is what was said. Exodus 3:1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire and it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over there and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Do not, and Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you, that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? What then shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. May God add his blessing in the reading of this word. Beloved, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, the first thing we have to do this morning is we have to decide amongst ourselves. We are not going to see Moses as Charlton Heston. You can't do that. You can't do that because although it was an incredible movie, it is not representative of the Moses that was here that day. Charlton Heston, they grayed his hair, but he was still a man of 40 when he made that movie. They gave him some lines in his face, but this Moses is 80 years old. And he has lived 40 years in the desert of Midian. He has been a worker bee for his father-in-law, Jethro. He has a wife, he has some kids, but for 40 years, he's really spent more time with sheep than he has anyone else. 40 years. I know that they lived a long time, right? We know that Moses is going to live to be 120, right? So let's go ahead and back that down a little bit. If you're going to live to be 80, then it would be reasonable to think that he spent 20 years in the desert raising sheep. That's our timeline. How many of you spent 20 years doing a menial task and thinking, there's no greatness in this? Oh, how many of you have spent 5 years doing a menial task and thinking, there is no greatness in this?
Stop airing my dirty laundry.
Hey, you jumped all over my sermon earlier, so. And I told Brandon in the midst of it, she's just burying me here. Half my sermon disappeared in your opening deal. So, how many of us get frustrated at 6 months? Of, my goodness, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm not getting anywhere. There's no greatness in this. I mean, at some point, we have to deal with the fact that someone told us when we were little, Mike, you can be the president if you want to be. I mean, when you were little and somebody said that, That was still probably a good thought. You tell kids that today, it's like, no way, I'm not going to do that. I mean, even little kids recognize, I don't want to mess with that. "80 years old. He's basically a veteran. He's working for somebody else. Take it this way. Maybe we understand it better this way. He's working for the man. Isn't that what we say? I'm just working for the man. You're just a stiff. You're a name. You're a number. You hold down a spot. City employees, come on. You know that to be true. I don't mean to break your heart, but Regina, if you don't show up tomorrow, somebody else will be sitting there doing slides. If you don't show up for a week, you don't have a job, and somebody else will be sitting there doing slides. Brandon, if you decide to quit tomorrow, somebody else is going to be doing your job. I don't care who you are, what you do. If I decide I'm over, the truth is you'll find somebody else to stand up here and do this. Because all of us find ourselves at times in our lives just saying, there's no greatness in this. I hate it when somebody reminds me that any trained monkey can do what you do. I hate that, but it's true. I always wanted to be an astronaut. Literally, monkeys went up before me. And so, it is this place of, when is God going to get me prepared enough to be great? Well, let me tell you. Part of the reason that we have to recognize where we are is because all of us are coming from a broken place. You see, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and therefore all of us deserve the sum of that, which is death. And so we come at it from a different place. We come at it from a place of brokenness. And the fact that God mends us together and says, no, you're not broken, you are good. I am good, you are good. I am great, you are great. If God is holy, we are holy. And yet we somehow don't believe that. We tend to shove that off and say, yeah, but that's for somebody else. That's for Billy Graham. That's for somebody else. That's for somebody who's got a lot of charisma and looks good in front of the people and can speak well. I want to remind you of something that we hardly ever talk of, because all we ever do is try to talk of it in terms of the negative, not the positive. Stephen actually says of Moses, Moses was a man of great words and deeds. Remember, that's who Moses really was. Moses had been raised to be a leader. Moses had been raised to be a warrior. Moses had been raised to take on the people. Literally, there is some belief in the fact that Pharaoh saw Moses in a greater light than his own flesh and blood. Cecil B. DeMille got that right. And then Moses recognizes who he is. We wonder, how did this happen that somebody with such incredible discipline could break? Well, he saw his people. And he recognized that that is who he is. And in seeing his people, he saw the injustice and he broke. And in that brokenness, he killed. And then we see us. I don't know what you've done. I know all of us have done something wrong. We all have a tendency to do things wrong. Maybe it's in thought. Maybe it's in deed. Maybe we just have lived a life that is kind of sheltered from what other people see of us. That is over there, and then this is who we really are. And I know that you all, we talked about this last week in regard to that voice in our head, but the truth is, you know you. I know me. I know the things I don't say because you're not supposed to say those things. And yet, God says if we're thinking them, they're there. Doesn't mean it's not a part of us. And then we see Moses. Moses buries the body in the sand. And what does he do? He flees. He runs. He hides. He gets away. He's a fugitive. Broken people make 3 mistakes. Let me tell you what those mistakes are. This, I hope that you'll kind of make note of if you're making notes this morning, but this I hope you'll make note of. Broken people make 3 mistakes. Number 1, people who are broken often run before they're sent. People who are broken often run before they're sent. Hold on to that. They jump ahead, they get involved before they're sent. Number 2, we retreat after we have failed. Okay, number 2, we retreat after we have failed. Frequently we fail and we become embarrassed. We retreat into obscurity to keep from being seen. Number 3, we resist when we are called. So, 1, 2, 3. People who are broken often run before they're sent. They retreat after they failed, and they resist when they are called. God says, I have a plan. We tend to find ourselves stumbling through life and not seeing what God's plan is for us, and so we say no. You may have a plan, obviously not for me. Moses finds the surprise of his life when he stumbles on a burning bush. Now, interestingly enough, I've done a little bit of research, and one of the things that, and I know that you all think that, you're always saying that, and sometimes some of the research is kind of hokey, but this is probably the hokiest research of all. So, interestingly enough, in the desert of Midian, it was not uncommon to see a burning bush. Check that. It was not uncommon to see a burning bush. As a matter of fact, a lot of the Bedouins would not go and try to find wood. That was silly. They would just burn a bush. And so seeing a burning bush was not uncommon for Bedouins in the Midian desert. But seeing a burning bush that was not consumed, that's a big deal. And interestingly enough, even the scripture kind of lends itself to that. That he sees the burning bush, but then he recognized upon looking at it further, it's not being consumed. And so then he goes. He wants to get closer to this, which is so intriguing. Isn't that kind of the way we are? I've talked about this before in other sermons, but I guarantee you, I am one of the greatest rubberneckers in the world for an accident. The truth is, I kind of like seeing accidents. I don't know why. It's just part of my nature. I want to see damage and destruction. And as I drive past it, I can't help but look. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. How did that happen? And isn't that the way we all are in regard to things? I mean, the truth is, you have to admit, you've probably spent more time watching Harvey coverage in the last few days, simply because it's amazing. It is incredible. I just realized that the Cajun Navy was not all from Louisiana. I didn't know that. Did you know that? That is just a name that is given, and if you're from Louisiana, I apologize for this, for a bunch of rebel people to come together and do something. I didn't know that. The Cajun Navy is from Nebraska. The Cajun Navy is from Oklahoma. The Cajun Navy is from Tennessee. The Cajun Navy is from Arizona. The Cajun Navy is from Louisiana. The Cajun Navy is from all across the state of Texas that wasn't affected. That's what they just called them, was the Cajun Navy, because during Katrina, we had all of these Cajuns, these crazy Cajuns, that went down there to try to help. But they didn't go down and try to help until after it was over, because they knew that people were shooting each other. But here in Texas, we have this thing, and we called it the Oklahoma Standard when we were having our bombing. But now, Texas has their own standard of helping. You know, really, there's nothing worse in the world than having to look somebody in the face and saying, we don't need your help anymore. That's what's going on right now. I mean, there are still some places, but there are people paid to go do it now. There's enough people. Whereas previously, the mayor, the governor, everyone was saying, we need all the help we can get. We're overwhelmed. Let me tell you that a symbol of greatness that comes from an Abraham Lincoln also comes from a governor of Texas and a mayor of all these little towns, because they are reaching out and saying, we need help. Beloved, learn from that. Learn from the fact that to be great, we have to say, we need help. You see, God heard the cry of the Israelites. That's what the story says. The cry of the Israelites is the Israelites saying, we need help. We're suffering. We're hurting. We need help. And so Moses goes over to check out the bush. And he hears a voice coming from the bush. Moshe, Moshe. I can't read that without imagining the emotion of a Moses who hears the voice of God, and he must have thought, he found me. You see, Moses is not unaccustomed to God. Moses is a Hebrew. He knows the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that God says his name, Moshe, Moshe. And Moses responds, Hanani, here I am. That gives me tingles. How long have you been waiting? You see, God is calling to you. God is saying your name. You may not hear it audibly, but God is calling your name. You see, we need to be curious about the burning bushes that are not being consumed. Beloved, we have that opportunity still today. There are lives that we see that are literally on fire, and they are not being consumed. And we need to go and look and see, what is that? And let God speak it to us and call our name. People who are broken. People who are broken often run before their sin. You see, as soon as he says, here I am, God says, I need you to go. You see, Moses is sent. Have you done some running? Have you gone before you were sent? Oh, I bet you can think of that on your own. I don't want you to raise your hand. I don't want you to share the story. We don't have that much time. But a lot of us recognize there have been times in our lives that we've gone way before we were sent. Who hasn't done a little bit of running? It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how young you are. We've all done a little bit of running. We've all gone before God told us to go. And that doesn't necessarily work. We've heard there was opportunity there. Isn't that why sometimes we run before we're sent? It's because somebody said there's a great opportunity. I was sitting here on Tuesday night, and Ron Luca came in. Ron Luca is quite the tempter. I mean, if you all didn't know that, I don't know how you live with him. I couldn't live with Ron. I mean, that's a good thing. But Ron Luca came in on Tuesday night, and these are the words he said. You can go work for FEMA at $2,000 a week. $2,000 a week. That's $8,000 a month. That's a pretty good deal. Now, I immediately thought to myself, nah. But on Wednesday morning, I got online. Because Ron is the tempter. And I began to look, and Ron's not lying. That was my first thought. Ron didn't lie. It's $2,000 a week. Oh, but it gets better than this. It's $2,000 a week plus room and board. It's $2,000 a week plus you get paid $10 an hour for all the time you're off. Rick, you're thinking, what am I doing next week? Right? I can see it in your face. Yeah, me too. Don't go before you're sent. How many of us have heard that it'll be easier to survive there? How many of us have been told, you can do this? How many of us have been told, just jump through this and jump through that, it's all going to be good in the end? How many of us have been told, they have a better system, they have a better plan, their insurance is better, their retirement is better? How many of us have just heard how great it's going to be, and so we go running before we're sent? How many of you have ever gotten someplace and thought, oh crap? I bet all of us have kind of felt that at one time or another, whether it was a fishing hole or a job. I have never caught the amount of fish that people that come from that fishing hole tell me they've caught. Ever! I don't care where it is. So have you heard your name? Because until you hear your name, you probably ought to stick it out because you've got a little more time. Maybe it's in that 20 years, maybe it's 40 years, I don't know. But I know that God wants you to be great. Because He made you that way. And so the second thing, you remember when you ran and you got there and it wasn't what you thought? We retreat after we fail. How many of us have spent time, I don't know, a year, a decade, trying to live in obscurity to make it look like what we did was okay? You ever done that? I have. I'll just stick it out here a while, because then it looks like what I did was okay. I'll just stick it out here a while, because then people won't say, mistake, wasn't it? I'll just stick it out here a while. Okay, maybe it wasn't a job. Maybe it was a marriage. Maybe it wasn't a marriage. Maybe it was a vehicle. Maybe it wasn't a vehicle. Maybe it was a home improvement. Maybe it wasn't a home improvement. Maybe it was a decision that you chose to believe in your heart. And so you just stuck it out for a while. Because you didn't want anybody to say, bad decision, huh? Oh, we are great defenders of our own decisions, aren't we? But if we can just hide, if we can just stay back in the trenches, I mean, think about Moses. Moses goes and lives in the Midian desert to remain in obscurity, to say, I put that behind me. Oh, isn't that a great word? I put that behind me. How many of us have done that? We retreat after we failed. Oh, I put that behind me. I'm just going to go live somewhere else. I'm going to go do something else. We can justify anything in our lives that we choose to put behind us when we fail. Have you retreated to just like keep from facing the judgment of your failure? You know, Moses ran away. Moses is a leader of men. He's not a leader of sheep. And yet he spends 40 years in the desert with the sheep. We've been there. We've been there. God made you. He created you. He gave you a spirit of wholeness. And when we retreat from our failure, we are saying we give up. Don't give up. and then that one that everybody knows. We resist when we're called. Right? I mean, we have to accept that. We have to accept the fact that Moses says, well, wait a minute. And remember who he's talking to. He's talking to a bush. Wait a minute. Well, what happens if I go there and say, who am I going to tell him? Who was it? Well, I want you to hear. Our worldly life doesn't accept this. We've got to get past our worldly life. The truth is, if God sends you, you're doing the right thing. Listen for the voice. Don't retreat when you fail. What would have happened to the Israelite people? I mean, this is not even an arbitrary question. This is the reality. Had Moses gone and said, "Let my people go so we can go to the desert and worship," because that's what he said. Let my people go so we can go to the desert and worship the one true God. And Pharaoh says no. And Moses says, "Fine, I'm going back to Midian. I've got sheep to tend." Don't we have that little bit of tendency within us? Must not have been the right thing, God. They said no. Part of the biggest problem we have in life, and we talk about it on Wednesday night a lot, is how do I hear? How do I know that it was God's voice? It's telling me to go. Maybe you need to spend more time with the sheep. God says, you tell them it was me. Well, let me tell you, when you hear your name, you'll know God's voice. When you hear what God has in store for you, you will recognize that it is greater than what you can do. Beloved, I think we mess up so much of our lives asking the question, can I do that? Yeah, I can do that. Okay, that must mean I heard the right answer. I got to go. When in fact, God is only calling you to things you can't do. What He's calling you to is to rely on Him to do it. Whatever it is. The things that you can do on your own, you should already be doing. But the things that are greater than you, listen for God's voice. In our brokenness, we're always looking to be made whole. When I think of the word masterpiece, and I wonder if there was a thought in your head about what he mean by God's masterpiece. When I think of masterpiece, there are some songs in my life. There are some songs that I hear, and this is the way I relate to it because music is just a real important part of my brain structure. And when I think of Carole King's Tapestry, if you all grew up in the 70s, you listened to a lot of Carole King. Those are wonderful songs. When I think of James Taylor and the songs that he sings, those are wonderful songs, but they're not masterpieces. When we think of masterpiece, we think of something grander, something that is on a much larger scale. Beloved, you're Moses. God created you to be a Moses, a masterpiece, something on a much greater scale. God looked at all of His chosen people and said, those people they're masterpieces. When you think of what it takes to put you together and to knit you in your mother's womb, you are a masterpiece. When I think of a masterpiece in music, I think of the prayer. I know. I think of the Lord's Prayer. I think of Pachelbel's Canon. I think those are masterpieces. Don't get me wrong, I love to listen to James Taylor. But when my ears hear a masterpiece, it's an entirely different emotion. Beloved, listen. Listen. Listen for your name. Because God is calling to you to be great in what you do. And He's calling you to go and be great for others. You are God's masterpiece. Let us pray. God, this day we thank you that we get a chance to see Moses for who he was, then who he was after that, and then who he was going to be in the future, and even to the point of seeing him stand again on a mountain overlooking what you were giving to others. God, thank you that we don't have to experience the outcome to be who you want us to be in the process. Lord, let our 40 years be 20 minutes. Because that we can get used to. But if it be 20 years, Lord, let me be patient in the waiting to hear that voice. Moses. Moses. And then let me respond. By not running, but saying, here I am. Let me never back up from failure. Because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Lord, let us be great. Let us be the masterpiece you have created us to be. We ask all these things in Jesus' name.